Do you remember the last hour you spent without touching your phone? Probably not. According to statistics, the average person touches their phone 2,600 times a day. Every screen you swipe isn't just a simple distraction. It's actually a conscious sacrifice you're making from the smartest, most pro-thinking center of your brain. Your attention isn't just drifting, it's literally being erased. When we live by constantly reacting to notifications, we are actually consuming the part of our brain that does the real thinking, our prefrontal cortex. We are turning our minds into distraction machines that produce zero real value. But today, we are taking back control. By combining the productivity genius of modern times Cal Newport with the legendary principles of Napoleon Hill from 1928, I've prepared an epic survival guide for you to reclaim your focus and become the boss of your life. This is Catalyst Power. Let's dive into it.
Yes, unfortunately, that is exactly how it is. I read a statistic recently. According to 2023 data, an average person touches, swipes, or clicks their phone exactly 2,600 times a day. 2,600 times. It's a truly insane figure. But the most shocking thing isn't the size of this number. The real deal is that with every touch, we voluntarily sacrifice a small piece of that high-level thinking center of our brain. By doing this, we are actually gradually using up our prefrontal cortex. Our mind has turned into a machine that reacts instantly to everything. It's a machine of distraction that can't produce anything on its own. And the worst part is, this machine constantly gives us a fake sense of achievement. We reply to those messages all day long, and when we go home at night, we say, "Wow, I worked hard today." Whereas we didn't actually produce anything useful that day. We just organized other people's priorities. In today's deep analysis, we are going to completely shatter this illusion. We have two giant names on the table. One is the productivity genius of modern times, Cal Newport. We will talk about his famous deep work thing. The other goes way back to 1928, Napoleon Hill, and his legendary principle of concentration from his book, The Law of Success. There is almost a century between them, but they complement each other perfectly. So our intention isn't just to work more or anything. We will learn from Hill where to focus our energy, and from Newport how to protect that focus from the noise of the modern world. In other words, while Newport shows us the ways to protect our mind, Hill tells us where the compass should point. When these two combine, a complete survival guide emerges. So then, come on, let's go directly to the neurological root of this, to the very center of the problem. Now let's explain Newport's concepts of shallow work and deep work. Shallow work is those easy jobs where we react instantly. Deep work is the stuff where you give 100% of your attention and create something of new value. But the thing that isn't understood is this. Why are we so addicted to shallow work? Because our brain is evolutionarily wired to choose the path of least resistance. In other words, the easy way out. However, in deep work, for example, when writing a difficult code from scratch, the brain burns a crazy amount of glucose and physically tires you out. Shallow work is the exact opposite situation. When you delete an email, your brain releases a little dopamine and says, "Well done, good job." That feeling of instant relief you get from emptying that inbox.
But Newport points out a very dangerous situation here. We call this attention residue. You know that piece of focus we leave behind when switching from one task to another? That's it. Let's say you are writing a report that requires a lot of focus. You checked a message for just 5 seconds. You think you can go back to the report exactly where you left off. But actually, you can't. A part of your brain is still thinking about what that message meant. Until that attention residue is cleared, you can only work with a very small part of your capacity. So this multitasking thing they talk about is a huge lie. This was said back in 1928, even before the internet existed. Hill says, "The dispersion of energy over too many channels is the greatest cause of mediocrity." It's truly incredible how well he understood the human mind. Let's open this up a bit.
You know how they always say, don't spread your energy everywhere like a flashlight. Focus it on a single spot like a laser beam. This is a very classic metaphor, but it stays a bit superficial. The real issue is this. You know how dozens of unnecessary tabs stay open in the background of a computer? Because of them, that big program you actually need to use keeps freezing. In other words, we are consuming our mental memory, our RAM. This is a very accurate analogy. And do you know what the really interesting part is? Both Hill and Newport say that managing this memory isn't a natural-born talent. In other words, this is a learned and developed condition. Just like lifting weights, it's a skill that can be improved with training. You need to develop your attention muscle. Because the real currency of the new economy is no longer information, it's attention. Whoever holds the attention wins the game. But the real deal is where you point this laser. I think Hill's shocking rule comes into play right here, defining a definite chief aim. Definite chief aim, Hill says, a ship that tries to go everywhere at once will arrive at no harbor. This is actually the most critical step for us. Even if you wake up that massive focus, if you don't connect it to a clear aim, you'll just be doing empty work very efficiently. But I think the idea of a definite chief aim scares people a little. We call this fear FOMO, fear of missing out. We are afraid of having tunnel vision and focusing on just one thing. But when we look at history, we see that this focus has always worked. For example, we can look at Carl Jung building a stone tower in the Swiss woods without even having electricity. Or J.K. Rowling secluding herself in a luxury hotel to finish the last Harry Potter book. These stories are very famous. I mean, these people physically pull themselves away from the other 99 things. These are great examples to show the power of the environment. But people always make the same mistake here. Hearing this, they say, I don't have a tower in the woods, so I can't focus. This is where it gets really interesting, because I have to ask this on your behalf, as your voice. Really, we don't have the luxury of locking ourselves in a 5-star hotel or going to the forest. In a modern office, right next to the boss, how are we going to protect this main aim? You have to think like this. Jung's tower was actually a mental ritual more than a physical building. In other words, we can call it a mental tower. Let's call it the control of mental habits and the environment. Newport explains this beautifully with a modern example, Jack Dorsey. The man was the CEO of both Twitter and Square at the same time. Imagine one of the busiest people in the world, and he is bombarded with notifications every second. Twitter was already purely a job of chaos and crisis management. But at the same time, he had to make massive innovations at Square. So how did he manage both without mixing them up? By creating theme days. The man built his mental tower in the dimension of time. By theme days, you mean he divided the days. For example, on Tuesdays, he focused only on the product, and on Wednesdays, he focused only on marketing. On that day, if it was product day, he didn't even look at any email or crisis outside of the product.
This is incredible willpower! By setting these strict boundaries in his own company, he actually cleared the way for innovation. So, should we think like this here? I mean, Jack Dorsey is a billionaire CEO after all. Of course, he has the luxury of not answering anyone. Yes, this is a fair objection. But people work in a normal office full of co-workers who constantly say, "Can you take 5 minutes to look at this?" How are we going to draw that line among the people who pay our salary? Or else we'd get fired. This is a very realistic concern. And Newport's Join the Shallows rule brings a practical solution to exactly this point, this problem. Let's open up the part about draining the shallow waters a bit. Newport isn't telling you to go to your boss and say, "I'm not reading emails anymore." It's impossible, even harmful, to zero out shallow work completely. After all, internal company communication has to happen somehow.
The point is not to destroy those tasks, but to trap them in a specific box during the day. We call this time blocking. If you need to spend 40% of your day on shallow work, you should do this in bulk during specific time blocks, not randomly. For example, you only reply to emails during that part of the day, and you protect and defend the remaining time slots, those deep work blocks, as if they were as sacred as a doctor's appointment. See, this is a great perspective. In other words, instead of saying no to people, you say, I'm in deep focus right now. I'll look at that task of yours with my full attention during my administrative hour at 2 o'clock. This way, you draw the boundaries clearly. I think this is also Hill's magic key concept. The power of directing and managing attention. Because if you don't manage your own calendar, others will manage your calendar. And be sure nobody's priority is to achieve your big vision, your main aim. Everyone is just trying to solve their own tasks. But right here, the discomfort of turning people down comes into play. There is a social hesitation involved. Evolutionarily, we are afraid of being excluded from the group. That's why Newport says we need to get used to saying no. It's very important to understand this. Behind every yes, there is actually a hidden no. When you say yes to those small and unnecessary requests, you're actually saying a huge no to your long-term career, which is your definite chief aim in Hill's terms. That hidden no thing always hits me. Let's say we handled the external obstacles, we talked to the boss, we blocked the time, we built our tower, we set up the physical and social environment. But then what about that biggest enemy inside us? Even if we leave the phone in the other room, our mind looks for the dopamine of those 2,600 touches. Yes, exactly here, that moment of crisis begins. I sit at the desk and before even 10 minutes pass, my brain is literally screaming. This is so boring, let's look at Instagram, it says. So how are we going to deal with this internal rebellion? The way to stop this rebellion isn't to fight it, but to make peace with it. Here, Newport's rule that I love the most, but is the hardest to apply, comes into play. Embrace the boredom. Now, this might sound like a very weird piece of advice to you. Yes, we have completely lost our ability to be bored. Think about it. Even in those 10 seconds we wait in an elevator, we immediately pull out the phone. There are people looking at the screen even while waiting at a red light. Our mind has become used to constant entertainment. If you bomb your brain with a ton of stimuli at every empty moment, that brain panics when it sits at the desk and faces the silence of deep work. Because deep work, by its nature, is actually a bit of a boring job. There is no entertainment coming from the outside there. The opposite of the focus muscle isn't distraction, but actually the need for constant stimulation. In other words, to develop that muscle, we need to consciously put up with that boredom in daily life.
Hasn't it always been like that in history? For example, those silent walks Charles Darwin took in the woods while thinking about the theory of evolution. Or Steve Jobs' famous walking meetings. While the body moves, the mind completely disconnects from the outside world. Newport calls this productive meditation. Productive meditation. The essence of this term is that when you don't run away from boredom, I guess the brain starts to fill that void in different ways. And right here, we come to that massive principle of Hill's, the subconscious principle. Regarding Hill's concept of unconscious competence, he says, if you focus completely on a problem, your subconscious continues to solve that problem in the background, even when you leave that desk and rest. This is actually the magic of the subconscious. I always visualize this in my head like this. Let's say you prepared a huge video project on the computer. You're done and you told the computer, go ahead, render this, meaning bring it to its final state. The computer starts working silently in the background. Meanwhile, you deal with other tasks. You cook, you go for a walk. But if you open 3 heavy games on the computer while that render is running, what happens? The system crashes. That's exactly what happens when we get bored in those 10 seconds in the elevator and immediately go on TikTok. We actually crash that amazing render process our brain is doing in the background. We literally pull the plug.
To avoid crashing that background processor, we need to change that unhealthy relationship we've built with technology. So how are we going to change this? Newport calls this the craftsman approach. You shouldn't keep those apps on your phone or social media just saying maybe it'll be useful one day. The question we actually need to answer is, does this app directly serve my main aim, or is it just a trap that distracts me? This craftsman approach actually overlaps perfectly with Hill's concept of autosuggestion. You give your mind that goal, then you clear the noise in your mind so that suggestion can work. Otherwise, you can't even hear your own inner voice in all that noise. We always talk about things like a social media detox. Our goal isn't just to win 2 hours during the day. The real goal is to release our brain's deep analyzing and creative networks, those background processes again. Our goal is to keep that render system open as much as possible. And now if we manage to add all these processes into our calendar, we reach the very top, the formula for mastery. So let's say we did everything right. We drained the shallow waters, we built our tower, we embraced the boredom. At the end of the day, what is waiting for us? The real difference emerges that will separate us from those who spend their day with shallow tasks, that theater of being busy. Here, Newport talks about that famous research by Anders Ericsson. The Berlin violinist's research is a very critical study that everyone should know. We always think like this: the world's best violinists must be working much more than ordinary ones. For example, 12 hours a day or something. But the data doesn't say that. Actually, everyone works approximately the same hours. So then, what creates that massive quality difference? It's that intensity level they call deliberate practice. Deliberate practice. Because when a mediocre musician picks up the violin, what do? They constantly play those familiar pieces they already play well, which sound good to the ear. Because this makes them feel good about themselves, it doesn't strain the mind. But those elite soloists in Berlin don't do that. So what do? In the morning, when their minds are the freshest, they pick up the violin and focus only on that 2-second transition of notes where they can't play, where they make mistakes. Without any outside stimuli, they work in those 90-minute blocks where their minds are literally suffering with 100% attention. They know that development isn't random.
If we adapt this to modern business life, the picture becomes very clear. Trying to produce something in between while replying to emails in an office for 8 hours is the situation of the ordinary violinist. At the end of the day, you get very tired, but you don't develop any real mastery. Whereas, when you close your door, silence the notifications, and direct all your mental power to that strategic thinking skill where you are the weakest, those 90 minutes make you an expert. And you don't just stay an expert, you experience the moment when Hill's vision turns into reality. Hill says, every great achievement is first born as a spark in the imagination. But without that unwavering concentration, that spark remains only a fantasy. We just mentioned the dangers of tunnel vision. Excessive deep work can cut a person off from new opportunities. That's why we don't dry up the shallow waters completely. Shallow waters keep us connected to the world.
But the deep waters are where we build the real value that we will present to that world. A person who designs their time like an architect takes control of their life. To summarize the subject, amateurs run from discomfort and take refuge in their phones, while professionals know that discomfort builds mastery. Deep work is not a tactic, but actually a choice of a lifestyle. Now, before wrapping up the conversation, let's combine everything we've learned into a single prescription for our listener. Let's draw a general framework like this. Determine your own definite chief aim using Napoleon Hill's visionary compass. Then build an indestructible fortress around that goal with Cal Newport's merciless deep work blocks. And embrace that feeling of boredom. Don't take your phone out in the elevator so that your subconscious continues to work for you. Trap the shallow waters in a box, put up with that social pressure of saying no, and win back your time. Because time is like a gas that spreads and disappears when left to itself. When you limit it, when you subject it to a certain pressure, it transforms into a real power. Subjecting time to pressure, an amazing idea. That is actually the essence of the whole subject. And now, as we slowly come to an end, it's time to ask that critical question that will leave you alone with your own reality. If the quality of your attention, as Napoleon Hill says, really determines the quality of your life, and if those technology giants, as Cal Newport warns, spend billions of dollars every day to steal your attention 2,600 times, you have to ask yourself this question: who owns your own mind? Right now, are you really sitting in the author's seat of your life story, or is it those non-stop notifications? If you want to take back the pen, we have just one request from you, just one single step. Today, for just 1 single hour, turn everything off. Create a 1-hour deep block, experience facing that boredom, and allow that massive system in the background to wake up. Let's see what you can truly create in that silence. We have reached the end of Catalyst Power for this week as well. Goodbye for now.
And don't forget to like, hit the buttons and subscribe to our channel.